Well, there's a bit going on, and with some free time, I can actually address this topic. As you may gather from the title, this video is going to be talking about why not every game can have an easy mode. I am very well aware of the drama going on between Ackman and Quantum TV, and I do want to address that topic as well, but just not for this video. So let me know if you do want to see that. In the meantime, I do want to discuss the original dilemma of Elden Ring not having an easy mode. Moving onwards, there has been discussions of lowering the difficulty of certain games that don't have an easy mode. As someone who grew up on the tail end of the arcade era, it does feel strange for me to see people begging for an easy mode when a challenging game meant that the game was fun. Going off a small tangent here, there's a certain atmosphere arcade games give off that make them seem appealing. Then you have some that go out of their way, like the Jurassic Park game. What I'm trying to say is that if a game looks like fun and plays well, you're going to have fun regardless how good or bad you do. Most games that have difficulty options that include an easy mode don't really go out of their way to change the overall experience, as there may be one or two less enemies, or way more health pickups, ammo, and so on. Recently, I beat Wolfenstein The New Order, once on normal difficulty and again on Nightmare mode. I wish I could tell you what the difference was. In all reality, Nightmare mode just made you die in what seemed like 3 or 4 hits, but if you played smart, used corners, and every weapon you had available, it's fairly easy to cheese a lot of these sections in the game without having to go head on, and there were no obvious changes to health and ammo pickups. When I first played through it, I was running into health pickups very often, and I expected most of them to be gone in my Nightmare playthrough, but sure enough, they were still there. It seems like the game was designed primarily for Nightmare mode, and with it having a simple gameplay loop, there was little that would need to be adjusted. With that said, if you don't know the level layouts and the different tricks that are in the game, a first time playthrough on Nightmare mode could be a little overwhelming. Maybe. And another example of this that is on the other extreme is God of War 2018. I did not really mention this in my final thoughts video, but the difficulty slider there is insane. I only played through the game once and beat it on a hard difficulty. While it was a challenge, it did get to the point where I was facing level 7 enemies while my gear was stuck on level 4 or 5. This meant I would die within 2 hits, and the game almost always has you facing more than one enemy at a time. So the only way to beat level 7 enemies with level 4 or 5 gear on hard mode would be by using any summons and perks you had, as well as dodging and parrying any oncoming attacks perfectly. Could it be done? Probably, sure. Does it need to be that difficult? Well, not really. Not for a God of War game, that is. Where you can't heal whenever you want, you have to find health in jars and crates. And you can easily wind up in a stun state if you miss an attack, or when using a special ability that has a wind up, leaving you wide open for an instant death. So in God of War, while the difficulty slider may be there, I think it's obvious that they did not expect someone to play on hard mode for their first playthrough, but instead to up the difficulty upon their second playthrough once you have better gear and are at a higher level, dealing more damage, and you'll be able to take on more than 2 hits. Now let's look at From Software's games from Demon's Souls to Elden Ring. These games were meant to be a challenge from the very start. They don't necessarily intend to ever make you so powerful that you match up with your next opponent. Instead, you're constantly behind and you have to go on quests and gear up so you can have what you need to make the fight more manageable. And even then, some bosses will be designed to counter certain playstyles. Do you like using a sword? Too bad, here's a lake of fire this boss always sits in. Do you like using magic and ranged attacks? Too bad, here's 2 bosses you have to fight at once. With that, you probably can make any playstyle work against any boss. There may even be a workaround to get the upper hand, instead of waiting and visiting the boss once you're over leveled. But the intention for the most part is that any major boss you come across is going to be a challenge. And although it sounds like you could simply make a game easier, it's not always as simple as having the enemy deal less damage or have less health. It would take extra effort to make a game like Dark Souls or Elden Ring easier. One thing these games are well known for are their flashy and large attacks that the game's bosses have. And if you're too slow, you'll constantly be taking damage from these attacks, and some of these attacks also place you in a stun state, making it even harder for you to recover. So you may be taking less damage overall, but if you're not able to dodge or parry or counter, you're still going to die. It's just going to take longer. Also, if you were to look at some attack types, these games have one-hit kill attacks. How are you supposed to adjust that? They have a unique animation that plays out if the enemy hits it successfully, which means that if there was an easy mode and those attacks no longer killed you instantly, an additional set of animations would have to be made of the player surviving said attack. Now imagine having to adjust the health bars of every enemy, reducing one-hit KO attacks so the player survives, create new animations for them, remove certain obstacles that are meant as one-hit kill traps for new players, and now you have a brand new game that offers a completely different experience that would have to be built on top of the currently existing game that you're still developing. There's a reason why From Software's games don't have a difficulty slider. That's because they were built to make you take damage and challenge the player. I know the whole term of get good is worn out and no one wants to hear it, and I'm in the same boat as well. However, if we are going to defend developers who make walking simulators, like the Stanley Parable, Firewatch, and other games that have very limited gameplay, and not really any challenge whatsoever, then why can we not have an actual game that uses old school death traps, a plethora of weaponry, and near impossible bosses? Why should that game receive hate when people can't beat it? There is a noticeable difference when a game has bad or clunky mechanics that feels very unpleasant to use, and it's another when the game feels smooth and has a rhythm to it, but has challenging gameplay. In short, From Software's games are not meant for everyone. These are niche games that were never really meant to be mainstream, at least not to the point of a standard AAA game where anyone can beat it no problem. It's better to think of them as a challenging indie game with a budget of a AAA game. I know it sucks that not everyone wants to stick to the challenge to enjoy the game, but in all honesty, if you're not a fan of the challenge, you're not going to be a fan of the overall gameplay. Not all is lost, as these games do get dissected very quickly from its active community, so it won't take long, if at all, to find guides that explain what the better methods are to beat each individual boss. Again, going back to some old school tactics of using guides and outside sources to fully experience what the game has to offer, as well as being able to team up with a friend or others to help with beating bosses. Outside of the game's difficulty, the last thing to discuss would be accessibility. Games should have accessibility options for those who are colorblind or have different diseases or disabilities that would require them to adjust certain settings, use unique controllers or configurations, and rebind the game's controls to work for them. This is something the industry has slowly been working on, and right now a lot of these options are not available in Elden Ring, and I would assume the previous FromSoft titles as well. There definitely should be more accessibility options to allow more people to experience the game and all its difficulty. And yes, I definitely do want to see everyone be able to play video games. But again, not every video game is designed to be played by everyone, at least not to the point of beating the entire game. We can change that and give players more accessibility options so that they can actually control their character and play the game and get through it. But even with accessibility options, it's not changing the gameplay difficulty, but giving the players more tools to better understand the game and better control their character. And if that's enough for someone with a disability to beat the game from beginning to end, then great. I would love to see that and support anyone who can. And I'm not just talking Dark Souls, I'm talking about any other game. If there's any criticism that I can give From Software for their games about any kind of difficulty, it would be not having these accessibility options, like not having larger text options, not having colorblind options, which has slowly been working its way into more and more games, and not having the option to fully remap the keybinds, which should be an industry standard by default. I can't really speak from experience on my side, I don't know what all would be involved or what all would be necessary, and it is different for each and every individual. I do recommend watching this video by Dynamic Reactions instead, that will give you more direct feedback on this topic. So outside of accessibility, there are many games out there that features difficulty scales. Far Cry games, Watch Dogs, God of War, Jedi Fallen Order, the list goes on. Let's not all lose our minds when one game says no. I am Mr. Rain, and I will see you next time.